The art of coaching is meet people where they're at. So if you're young and healthy, you might be able to just go straight into high intensity exercise. Let's say you're in your 50s or 60s, high intensity exercise could nearly be dangerous.
What is high intensity exercise?
High intensity exercise, for the simplest purposes, would be only 46% of the Irish adult population meet the minimum exercise requirements. The reason we don't do as much physical activity as previous generations is because the environment has changed.
My granny grew up on a farm in Sligo.
She would have walked down to the well to pick up 2 buckets of water. She's carrying 30 kilos farmer's walk. Her environment was strength training.
Hello and welcome back to the Lower Down Experience. Today I am very excited to welcome Albert Kehoe to the podcast. Albert is a skilled physiotherapist with extensive experience in helping individuals to achieve optimal physical health and wellness. With a deep understanding of the human body and a passion for promoting movement and recovery, Albert has been a key figure in guiding people through their rehabilitation journeys, whether it's through injury, recovery, chronic pain management, or improving overall mobility. Albert's expertise and dedication has made a significant impact on his clients' lives. We're thrilled to have him here to share his insights on maintaining and enhancing physical health. Albert, welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for joining me. And just a full disclaimer here, actually, the reason why Albert's on this podcast is because I went to see him because I had a sore shoulder. I fell on really hard ice back in March and as a result could do very minimal movement with my shoulder. And as you all know, I love to exercise and it really impacted on my yoga, which was the most frustrating thing for me. So I went to see him and he knocked it back into shape with a few sessions and then also some exercises that I didn't do initially because I'm a very bad patient, but I eventually did it when he allowed me to video him doing a derivative of exercises that I would normally do in the gym, which made it easier for me to kind of then understand what I was doing. So anyway, that's just a little intro. But Albert, you and I got talking during the sessions that we were doing together and I just found it so interesting, your entire take on movement, on longevity and on the importance of it. You're kind of singing from the same hymn sheet that I do, but as a physiotherapist you've so much more to offer people. So we'll start from the start.
From a different angle,
yeah, absolutely, 100%. No pills, just movement.
Well, yeah, I suppose exercise is the medicine, I suppose, that the physio is trying to deliver. I mean, the pharmacist has got their toolbox and then the physio has their toolbox. So for yourself, when you come in, there's some hands-on treatment, assessment and guidance through an exercise program, which is oftentimes all the body needs to heal itself because the body has an amazing capacity to heal itself, as you know. Mm-hmm. So we try to get people to engage in, I suppose, the appropriate exercise for them based on their injury or their position in life or their current fitness routine and then get them to progress from there.
Yes. So talk me through a typical session that you'd have with someone in terms of when they come to you. What is the first thing you tend to ask them?
Well, I suppose, look, it depends on the reason they come to see me. So I suppose if they're coming for an injury, it's very different than if they're coming for general fitness advice or looking to get started on an exercise program. So obviously if it's an injury, you have to find out what's the injury, what caused it. Was it traumatic? Did it come on over time? So basically, I suppose that's a subjective examination. And then you're trying to take them from that point of pain and move them back to not being in pain. And then that's generally what people are coming to physio for. But we always then try to promote the healthy lifestyle that brings them the next step from there on top of that. So I suppose we run a physiotherapy clinic and a gym. And I suppose depending on, again, where someone's coming from, if they're coming in from a sedentary position, they've got back pain, pain's their initial priority. But once they're free of pain, you're trying to get them to engage in an exercise program to keep them free of pain and to improve their overall health. Whereas someone who's currently playing sport might be, super fit and healthy, just have an injury, then, the injury is the focus. How do I get back to where I was? Because the injury takes you probably from where you are down and you have to work back up. So you're always trying to plan the route back to fitness. And I suppose as a physiotherapist, you're really coaching people in a subtle way through that journey of recovery.
Yeah. Well, what I find interesting, because I'd never been to a physiotherapist before, and I just thought that you rented a room in that CrossFit gym.
Yeah.
So then I went to see you, and I just thought you were going to do a few exercises on me, or, you know, manipulations, and then send me on my way. But then you brought me out to the gym and showed me the exercises that I should have been doing or should be doing to help my recovery.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting to me, that's the setup down there that you have.
Yeah. Well, a lot of physiotherapists would now be adapting that approach. So I suppose we've been doing it, I suppose since I left college, 2007. Would have always got into weight training or strength training. As again, strength training is anything from yoga, Pilates, up to lifting weights. It's resistance training. Now I know my yoga friends are going to kill me for saying yoga is resistance training, but we'll edit that note out. But resistance
why would they kill you for
it's
that?
a form of resistance, but it's probably more of a nuance than calling it a resistance training program.
Yeah, no, I would actually, that's why I do, well, I think that's why I love it, because
it's part resistance and part meditative and part movement based. And
oh, fuck it, I actually just do it for the strength, and obviously it gets me out of my own head,
yeah,
but I
it's
do
great.
it for the strength.
And it is great, and it is resistance training, but resistance training is on a continuum. I suppose if you take someone coming out of a really bad injury, they're in hospital bed, like getting up and walking is even at that level resistance training, because it's the resistance that they can handle at that point in time. Okay. So it's all on a continuum of movement. So I suppose a lot of physios are now shifting towards getting people to apply different types of resistance in the form of lifting weights, using resistance bands, using bodyweight exercises. And because we know that that's really good for your health and helps build muscle mass, bone density, and helps prevent, I suppose, lifestyle diseases and injury. The stronger you are, the harder you are to break.
This is true. But where do people start? Because I think sometimes, it's all well and good saying, exercise is great for your health.
Yeah.
How do people start? Because so there's people that do it already.
Yes.
And they maybe just coast along. They may want to do more. There's people that don't know where to start because they can't do it. They feel that they can't fit it into their day.
Yeah.
So let's talk to those people first.
That journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. And that's really all you need to do, is just get started. Find something. It doesn't have to be, it can be just 10 minutes of exercise, because it's a domino effect once you get started. Like, it's the hardest thing to do is to get started. So once you get started, you start to create a habit. You start to, you'll feel that sense of achievement that you did 10 minutes. And then the next 10 minutes aren't impossible. And you just start layering in bit by bit, small incremental changes. So your guidelines, your exercise guidelines are kind of a destination, the first stop, maybe, on that health journey. Because it is a journey for life. But you're trying to ramp up to that level and maintain it across your lifespan. And yeah, you might do more. And the guidelines would say those who can do more than 300 minutes and those who can do more than 2 to 3 strength training sessions a week or resistance training exercises sessions a week should do more, because the benefits are greater. And there is probably a threshold on that. Once you go beyond 600 minutes, it starts to wane off. And then we get to that elite athlete level again, where the increments are so minute for the amount of effort you put in. Mm-hmm. So there's definitely an upper ceiling. But for someone who's just starting, as I said, a lot of the benefits are for the beginner. And by just getting started, you start a snowball effect. Start to engineer your environment. So like, if you have a dog, bring the dog for a walk. Or if you've got a friend living next door, rope them in. So that you kind of create an accountability element with yourself. Like, every day at lunchtime, I work in a gym. Someone comes in and goes, "Are you working out today?" And head goes, "No." Mouth goes, "Yes." Feet go to the car, pull out the bag, and off we go. And then it just takes off. Okay, so if sit down and think, where am I at? Where would I like to go? I know what the guidelines are now. Start making one positive step towards that, and then take the next positive step, and then just keep going. And momentum builds and gathers over time. Don't try to do it all at the one time. Don't try to take everything on. Maybe start with that 20-minute walk, half-hour walk, 10-minute walk. Make it consistent. Might do it 3 times a week. Great. A couple of weeks' time, I might do it 5 times a week. Great. I might start adding in a few push-ups before I brush my teeth to go to bed, or when I get up in the morning. It's just start integrating in little elements into your life. And when you start doing that and you start looking for opportunities to be more active, they start to show up. So you're driving to work and, there's 20 parking spaces and one is really far away. But once you start thinking about ways to become more active, you park in the furthest away spot. You get to the escalator in the shop, you take the stairs. You see the lift, you go stairs. You're in the shop, you pick the healthier item. You're driving home and it's gym on the left and home on the right, and you turn left. It just starts becoming something that becomes part of your life. And it has to become part of your life in order for you to stick with it. Because if it's something that's a real burden to you, you're just not going to stick with it. And the most important thing is find something you enjoy doing. Like, you can get your heart rate up cycling, swimming, dancing, wrestling, doing jiu-jitsu. It doesn't matter. Like, find something you enjoy doing. You enjoy doing yoga. That's why you keep going back to do yoga, because it's something you enjoy doing. And people need to find their yoga. They need to find their thing that they enjoy. And there's no form of exercise necessarily better or worse than the other. They all have their pluses and minuses. But the one you're going to do is the one you enjoy doing. And then look at what you are doing and add in little bits and pieces to improve. So that'd be where I suggest someone would start. But I'd always set out the exercise guidelines, the WHO exercise guidelines, to everybody who comes in, because I think as a healthcare professional, that's one of our responsibilities. So you know from working as a pharmacist, the concept of every contact counts. And we had that, and it worked really well, and obviously still does for smoking cessation. But we also need to provide that for physical activity. And there's new guidelines out this year from the National Program. I'm going to forget the name of this, but anyway,
He has it written down.
I wrote it down, but I can't even remember.
So
but
can
anyway,
I bring my notes
it's
in?
the National Physical Activity Plan. Sorry, there we go. And it's set out by the HSE, and it outlines Ireland's National Physical Activity Plan. And as part of that, the new guidelines coming out through, and I was chatting to one of my doctor consultant colleague friends about this only yesterday, and the guidelines are now coming that medics will prescribe exercise, and nurses will prescribe exercise, and pharmacists will prescribe exercise, and make people aware of it at every contact, because we know that exercise is a really powerful drug. We call it a drug, but a really powerful intervention that we can apply at a population level to help reduce risks of all causes of mortality. We can reduce your cancer risk by, some estimates 20%, cardiovascular disease by some estimates 20%. You're building muscle mass, bone density, all these things that are...
Mental health as well.
Mental health, yeah. And I don't think anybody disagrees with the fact that exercise is really good for your health. I think that's just common knowledge now. But people aren't really aware of how much they should be doing, what type they should be doing, how to start, where to start, and how to integrate it into our societies. So I think that's a really important message to get across. So everybody who will come in will invariably get the same spiel. I'll ask them, how much are they doing at the moment? Are they aware of what the current exercise guidelines are, and would they like to know? And like everybody does want to know, and most people don't know what they are. So...
So tell me what they are.
Drum roll.
I'm hanging here.
So basically, it's 150 to 300 minutes a week of cardiovascular exercise, moderate intensity cardiovascular exercise, or you can reduce that duration by half if you're doing high intensity exercise. Now, high intensity exercise, obviously, you need to be at a level where you can do high intensity exercise. If you're somebody who's currently sedentary, high intensity exercise mightn't necessarily be the best onboarding point into the exercise world.
But isn't that what some people do? They go from zero to high intensity, and then they end up injuring themselves or not liking it.
Yeah, or they get really sore, or again, not to over medicalize exercise, but if they've been sedentary and take an avatar whose age is 60.
Explain that avatar.
Avatar being a person, a random person. So, but let's say, so again, it depends on the person. So if you're young and healthy and you don't have any underlying health conditions, you might be able to just go straight into high intensity exercise. Like, kids do it all the time. There's nothing wrong with that. And, if you're in your early 20s, but let's say you're in your 50s or 60s and you haven't exercised in 40 years, high intensity exercise could nearly be dangerous. Again, if you think about the stress on your heart, the stress on your overall joints and your overall muscular system, likelihood of getting injured or worse. So look, most people you'd start with moderate intensity exercise, but again, it's very individual. Where are you starting from? So,
what is high intensity exercise though? What do you mean by that? Explain it.
So high intensity exercise for the simplest purposes would be where you're out of breath to the point where you couldn't hold a conversation. And moderate intensity exercise is where you're a little bit breathless, but you could hold a conversation, but you wouldn't be able to sing. And again, if you think about that from that perspective, so again, there is certain heart rate thresholds.
Yeah.
But if we start getting into that, it's like, let's get out the monitor and let's start looking at everything.
I know, that green zone thing.
Yeah.
Because I was trying to do that and then I was like, oh, jeez, fuck this. I can't.
It's hard to keep on it, yeah.
Yeah, I just need to, when I go for a run, I just want to run. I don't have time to kind of do that green zone, long runs for...
And again, it depends on your environment. So, like, I like going mountain biking, but if I get on the mountain bike and cycle up the hill at zone 2, like at some point I might have to get off and walk because the hill is like this and there's no way of going zone 2 up the hill at my current fitness level. So I'm going to be waving in and out of zones anyway.
Just explain the zone thing just for people that may not understand what it is.
Exercise zones, you've kind of got zone 1, which is easy. It's just, walking around, getting up, making a cup of tea. Zone 2, or warm up zone. Zone 2.
Is zone 2 where you can run with someone or jog along and have that conversation that you're talking about? So like
have a conversation.
Intensity.
Now again, depending on your fitness level, you're probably waving in and out of zone 2 and zone 3 for most people. And then zone 3 to zone 4, you're getting into the threshold. So zone 3 is aerobic. Zone 2 is kind of, again, below an aerobic threshold where you're kind of working more in it's purely oxidative. Let's say I'm going for a 100-meter sprint. That's anaerobic. It's without oxygen. Okay, so that's the true kind of anaerobic zone. And then aerobic is working exclusively with oxygen. So you're trying to keep yourself within a system where you're exercising with oxygen and you're not generating lactate and generating H+ ions and all these things. But again, we don't need to go into those details. No. I know you've had loads of people on about that, and we'll kind of lose people in the weeds on that. And it's very complex. Simplest way to think about it is if you can hold a conversation while running, it's probably zone 2, maybe pushing into zone 3.
Okay.
Again, that's moderate intensity exercise. If you're exercising at a higher threshold where you could maybe say 1 or 2 words, but wouldn't be able to say a full sentence, that's high intensity. And that's what most people need to know. And then, if you're doing bouts of exercise that are unsustainable, where you need to kind of work, rest at intervals, I mean, that's getting up into the threshold and anaerobic zones.
Okay.
But again, most people don't need to know about that. They just need to get started with an exercise program.
Yeah.
So only 46% of the Irish adult population meet the minimum exercise requirements.
And the minimum is, so you've said 150 to 300. Is the minimum 150
the minimum,
or is it 300?
We call them the recommended as opposed to the minimum, because there is no real minimum. It's the recommended number is 150 to 300 minutes of moderate intensity exercise. That's cardiovascular exercise. So that's more kind of, a gym class, walking, running, swimming, cycling, something that's cyclical, something that can be sustained. The other side of the guidelines is that on top of those 150 to 300 minutes, you should be doing strengthening activities or strength training 2 to 3 times a week at least. They're the guidelines. So what's a strengthening activity? So if you drop down to do push-ups and let's say you can do 10 push-ups, but you can't do 11. We call that strength training because it's within a repetition range, just bringing your muscles to fatigue within a rep range that we wouldn't call cyclical. Like, so if I get on a bike and I pedal the bike 1,000 times, that's more aerobic or anaerobic depending on the speed. I can sustain it. Running you can sustain, but not everybody could do squats with their body weight for any more than a few reps. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So strengthening activities take your muscles, your joints, your tendons, your bones, and load them to a point where they're challenged to fatigue within a certain repetition range.
And when you're talking about press-ups there, can you drop your knees? Because I can't do them.
Well, again, that's just modifying the resistance. So that is resistance training. So again, if you take that repetition range, that, anything from 5 to 30 reps is building muscle, or what we call hypertrophy. Anything from, 1 to 10 reps is strength training, really is kind of more that's more challenging. It's more power based. Okay, so really it's 3 to 5 reps. But again, not to get lost in the weeds, the repetition ranges, the more you move beyond 30 reps, let's say, it's probably the strengthening benefit is waning. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if you can't sustain it beyond a certain number of reps, and that rep range is anything, I suppose, from 1 to 30 reps, depending on if it's about building muscle mass or building strength and power, the rep ranges vary. But again, most people don't need to worry too much about that if they haven't started. It's to start doing the type of exercise like squats and lunges and bridges and push-ups and rows that are big compound movements, is what we call them, multi-joint movements that bring your joints to a range, that challenge your muscles to fatigue within a relatively short number of reps. That's really what strength training is. And then, so if I can go for a run, it's more of a aerobic or anaerobic activity. And if I'm doing, depending on the speed, and if I'm doing strength training, it's more something that I could do a set of and then would need to rest to do more repetitions.
Okay.
So does that make sense?
Yeah. So when you're saying so people have to be doing, the recommended guidance is that they do the 150 to 300 minutes of cardio
plus the strength training.
And then they have to do the strength training. So how many minutes of that
So it's 2 to 3 strengthening sessions of about 45 minutes duration. Because you need to factor in rest into them. Yeah. And this is the thing that...
So how do people have the feckin' time for that? And that's the issue, Albert. Tell me that now.
Yes, that is the issue. I ain't going to have any more time for them. I didn't bring my sack of time that I could give them. But I suppose knowledge is power. When I sit down and explain this to people, and it's easier nearly to explain it by going and doing it. So if I drag you out of the office and make you... I won't drag you. If I bring you out of the office and make you do some squats, and you... Let's say you're going up and down and it's like, I could do these all day, Albert. And I go, brilliant. Not strength training. Here's a 20 kilo dumbbell. How many can you do now? It's tough. Okay. Strength training. Right, great. Now you know that a squat loaded is strength training. Okay? And then we get you to do some lunges and we get you to do some bridges. And we add resistance to the point where the resistance gets you to a point where you're challenged. Then we're engaging in strength training. And then we'll rest and we'll repeat, rest and repeat. And it's a bit like making a cake. You need some ingredients. Big compound movements are your best bets. Pushes, so like a horizontal push being a push-up or a press-up, whatever you want to call it, or a bench press, a row, which is pulling something towards the body. You can do that with a ring row, resistance band, a dumbbell, and again, obviously you need to develop a little bit of a repertoire for yourself. Overhead pressing, so taking a weight, putting it over your head is one of the rehab exercises we gave you. Pulling something down from overhead, that might be doing a chin-up or a pull-up, or just pulling down a resistance band or pulling down a lat pull-down machine. Squats.
So can people do these things at home then?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, most people I prescribe exercise for do them at home. Right. Because they don't have time to go to a gym.
And then how do they learn the correct technique? Because sometimes if you're doing a technique that's incorrect, then you could further damage yourself. So they have to be taught at first. You don't
want to make exercise inaccessible to people. You don't need to go off and get a certificate in college to know to do an exercise. Look, even if you learn, let's look at like learning how to ride a bike. Are you perfect at it when you start? No. Get started. You'll learn and pick up things as you go along. The most important thing will be, yes, you could get injured if you did it incorrectly, but if you're not doing it at all, you're at far bigger risk of injury than just getting started with it. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't let risk of injury dissuade me. I'd think more about, and again, there's so many resources out now online. You can go to a gym and get instruction. You can go to your physiotherapist. There's loads of ways to kind of get started. But yeah, you might need some initial instruction on technique just to help you. Well, it'll help you a springboard.
Yeah, and generally, a band and a couple of dumbbells, and if people haven't lifted weights before, even just bags of sugar or tins of beans. I always say that just to start off with.
And again, look, a bag of sugar and a tin of beans, progressive resistance exercise is important. So it's important to progress the resistance over time. So if I start with a bag of sugar and I can do 30 reps, it's no longer strength training. I need to now add resistance. And again, it's a case of how would I add resistance if I don't want to go out and purchase weights? That's fine. I mean, like you can literally fill up one of the shopping bags, a bag for life, with sand, and you've added resistance. So there is ways and means around it. Like you could put 30 kilos of sand in a bag it's the concept you need to understand. Resistance training needs to be challenging, multiple joint movements by and large, and then accessory movements to add in to build up weak links in the chain. So that's where, like, let's say you're doing a push-up, that's working shoulder, wrist, elbow. And then if I have a weak link in the chain, like a tricep, I might just do an isolation exercise for my tricep. It's all good, but the compound movements give you a bigger bang for your buck because they engage your nervous system, joint sense of balance, which we call proprioception. And it's much more challenging on the overall hormonal system, the endocrine system, which is really where you get the value out of your exercise.
Oh, it's those endorphins, isn't it?
It's the endorphins, but also your muscle is a metabolically active, it's now called a metabolically active organ, an endocrine organ. So it produces myokines, which are, again, big fancy word, but basically all you need to know is it produces chemicals when you stress it that are really good for your overall health. So you produce testosterone, sleep hormone, estrogen, you're producing anti-inflammatory chemicals, natural killer cells that knock out cancer cells. Again, the list of benefits is immense.
I'm sure even for insulin resistance and that, it's
absolutely insulin resistance, unbelievable. Yeah, metabolic syndrome. Exercise is one of these wonder drugs that can really help with your overall health.
It's just that it takes so long. Like, I mean, if it was in a pill form, it'd be great.
It takes a lot of time.
It's just that it takes time.
Yes.
So it's how do you encourage people to be able to fit it into their day then? Yes,
that's the key. So again, that's very much individualized. But this is where we talk about, and again, it's kind of almost a coaching element. You got to engineer your environment so that it's, at the moment, the reason we don't do as much physical activity as let's say previous generations is because the environment has changed. So like if you go back to 1900s in Ireland, and let's say you were rural Ireland, did you grow up in, where were your ancestors from? Rural Ireland,
North.
Dublin? Yeah.
The north.
Okay, so look, there probably would have been a well, and just painting a scenario, maybe it's...
Oh, this is right, actually. My granny grew up on a farm in Sligo, so yeah.
So she'd walked, so she'd no running water, probably no toilet. She would have walked down to the well to pick up 2 buckets of water to come up and just boil the spuds, make the dinner. It could be 15 kilos each. She's carrying 30 kilos farmer's walk up across the field. Her environment was strength training. It was resistance training. So I remember, so I grew up on a farm and my uncles were all farmers, and I remember being over in the shed one night and this neighbour came in and he had a sore knee and he was like, oh yeah, sure, I spent 30 years carrying 16 stone bags up and down the stairs. And I was like, he's making that story up. And my uncle's like, no, he's not making it up. That's how they got the grain up into the lofts. How do you think they got the grain up? They picked up 100 kilo bags and walked up the stairs with it all day long. So they didn't need to go to a gym. Yeah. These guys were unbelievably physically active.
Big, fine Irishman.
No, it's not even that. I have an image on my phone. I'm going to send it on to you for your show notes. In China, the I don't know what their names are, but they used to carry tea 100-mile journeys on a big pack on their back. And these would be light people, like 60 kilo, 70 kilo males who carry 130 kilos of weight, 100 miles as their occupation.
Jeez.
Like I wouldn't be able to walk out to the car. It would crush me.
Yeah.
Like it was just ingrained in society. So now modern society isn't like that. We've got a car, running water. We don't.
Tesco delivers online.
You don't need to do manual labor. So the burden of doing an hour of exercise is at the cost of having everything else so easy. So if we could go back in time and you could go work in the coal mines, digging and shoveling and pickaxing all day long just to be physically active, would you trade it in for the life you have now? The answer is no way. No one's going back to that. If you spend 10 hours a day doing manual labour, no one wants to go back to that. I know there is people who still do that, but no, people don't. People like the modern life. But the cost of that is you need to do some physical activity.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a privilege that we now have. So you're not going to get more time to do it, but it really is something that if you value your health and you have the knowledge to know that this is good for your health, then you should apply it.
I think when it's when you say 300 minutes, right, or you say a 45-minute strength session.
Yeah.
The way I do it, and this is So I'm like your typical mum with 3 kids and trying to cook dinners for them, and I can do everything, and manage a house and everything like that too, as well as working. So I literally, if I can squeeze 20 minutes in, if I have time, I do it. So I'll go, if I'm like, oh fuck, okay, I've got to do a call now in half an hour, I'll say I'll go for a run with the dog for 20 minutes. And that's I've done it then.
That's brilliant.
So, and I think that we need to try and kind of weave that into our world. Now, I know that so my kids are 11 up. So I know that if there's young mums listening to this and they've got babies hanging off their boobs, it's totally different. But there is you have to kind of look at your environment and go, what can I actually cut out of what I do in a day to get that 20 minutes in, or to sneak that in?
Yeah.
That's the kind of important bit, isn't it?
Exercise snacks, we call it.
Exercise snacks.
Yeah, that's what they're called. So basically, again, the 300 minutes, they don't all have to be done at the one go. They don't, like, ideally this is spread over the week anyway. They don't all have to be done, and like, you can literally do a 20-minute HIIT session, and that counts. So this is an important point. That counts for 40 minutes of exercise. So high intensity exercise accounts for double. So when you say 150 to 300 minutes a week, if the intensity is at that level where you're out of breath, can't hold a conversation, you reduce the duration by half.
Oh, that's fantastic.
That is fantastic. But again, you need to be fit enough to enter at that level.
Okay.
So again, it depends on where you're starting from. So if you're fit and healthy and you've got a busy week and you like to go out for a long cycle, with a chat with your mates, but you don't
want to say you like to go out for a few pints the weekend.
You can do that too. But if you normally like to go for your more moderate intensity exercise and you're fit enough to do high intensity exercise, you can do a 20-minute HIIT session and tick the box.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, it's kind of very nuanced. It's very individualized around your life. You mentioned the dog. So again, engineering your environment is important. I would not go for a walk until I got a dog. Like literally, I just walking's a waste of time.
Yeah.
But now it's one of my favorite activities. But I have to, like, if I didn't have a dog, I still wouldn't go for a walk. But I have a dog. The dog needs to walk every day.
Yeah. I actually see that as I do 5K with him, the poor little fecker. The tongue does be hanging out of him afterwards. But and it makes me feel less guilty because he's getting his exercise, and then obviously it's me out for my run as well. But then I see mums on the green that I live in an estate, and there's a green, and there's some mums there, they bring their babies out on the green on a nice, on a day that it's not pissing rain, and they're doing whatever kind of exercise that they're doing, and so they're incorporating it into their environment. So I suppose it's about trying to find the way.
You got
to
engineer your environment. Yeah, exactly. This magic world where everything is you're going to get loads of time to go to the gym and exercise. It's not going to exist. So you kind of have to. Again, one of my wife's friends was down at the weekend, and it was just a brilliant example of engineering your environment. She walks the kids to school, and she leaves the buggy there and runs home. So they've got a room set up where all the mums can leave their buggies, because they might be going onwards to work, but she can walk the kids to school and she can run home. Similarly, like, again, initiatives with schools where it's walk on Wednesdays, that has engineered a condition where parents are going to walk their kids to school. And like, it's societal changes that are going to make a huge difference like that as well.
I don't think women that are doing housework in the home can underestimate how sweaty you get when you're hoovering, and
that counts as well.
Absolutely, because that is physical exercise, physical
activity. If you're getting out of breath, you're and again, look, even if you're not getting out of breath, the less limit sedentary time. The less you're sedentary, the more you're up and moving. That all counts. But really, we are trying to encourage people to get into that kind of moderate intensity zone. But even if you're not getting to the moderate intensity zone, the more you're moving around, the better for you. Don't
kind of overthink it, because we're kind of designed to be a bit lazy, though, aren't we?
Absolutely, yeah. So again, it's I think I listened to one of your podcasts. Maybe it's the My Best Weight guy. He mentioned that book Burn, which is about how we consume calories, and if you're sedentary or you're active, you probably burn a similar number of calories. It's not a massive change in calories consumed. Your body will accommodate back to a baseline metabolic rate or a resting metabolic rate. It just tends to constrain energy expenditure in. You become efficient when you exercise, and you get more energy, and you can do more with the same amount of energy.
So exercise isn't necessarily, because that's what they say, it isn't necessarily a form of losing weight as such.
Not through calorie again, this is not through calorie expenditure. So if I exercise, I don't like quadruple the amount of calories I'm burning. Like if you go for a run, you might burn, depending on how efficient you are, and the fitter you are, the less you'll burn because you become more efficient, because your body becomes a well-tuned engine and it burns less calories because you're more efficient. But again, the caveat to that is muscle mass and all the rest, but we won't get too much into that. It's a lot easier not to overeat the calories than to try use exercise as a weight loss strategy.
That's an interesting line.
Yeah, because again, you can't outchase a bad diet. Now, what exercise does is it does reduce certain types of adiposity, certain types of fat cells. So it's like exercise makes you metabolically active in a way that's not necessarily all about weight and calories. So if we leave weight and calories out, if I am 100 kilos and 30% fat, or 100 kilos and 15% fat, I'm still the same weight, but one of those people is in a different health zone than the other. So obviously, the more adiposity you're carrying, the less good it is for your health.
And by adiposity,
fat
Albert
cells
means fat cells.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and again, where you're holding your fat is also important. But again, that's not something I want to get too deep into, because that's a whole different nuance. And I know you've had on loads of obesity experts. But what I suppose the message I'd like to get across is, look, exercise for weight loss, it doesn't work for the calorie reason. It'll work for the health reason. The healthier you get, the more likely you are to be at a healthy weight. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Like, and the healthier you get, the more likely you are to have lean muscle mass, which is metabolically active, and less fat tissue, which is metabolically active in an inflammatory sense. And you're more likely to have other health markers like better sleep, less stress, all going in the right direction for you. And that's what promotes the good health that will then maybe lead to weight loss. But it's not as a direct, it's an indirect kind of, it's not a calories burned option. It's more of a healthier human, because of exercise, tends to maintain more healthy weight.
I think as well, when you're exercising regularly, you tend to make better choices when it comes to
it's a keystone habit.
Yeah.
There's a keystone habits are journaling and exercise tend to be habits that create a domino effect across the rest of your healthy habits. So, and by journaling I mean awareness. So sitting down, writing down what you currently do, and that awareness that I'm talking about, when you ask them what do they currently do, oftentimes they're just totally unaware to begin with of what exercise they are and aren't doing. I've often had people come in and go, yeah, I used to play a lot of rugby and football and soccer and the whole lot. And I'm like, and when was that? Oh, when I was in school. And what age are you now? I'm 50. And when was the last time you did some exercise? Oh, yeah, about then. In their head, they're still a rugby player. They've just been busy. But the reality is that's that journaling, or that sitting down and seeing where I'm at and what I'm doing and analysing and accounting for. So it's reflective, journaling really. That's a keystone habit, because again, I suppose we kind of...
Do you write down what you do every day?
Do I write down what I do every day? No. But I do. I don't, because I'm very aware of what I do.
Okay.
So
So when you talk about journaling, you mean when people
journaling
really
is probably the wrong word. It's
because I think of journaling as like writing about your day.
Yeah, no, I don't do that. But I
was thinking that's a bit soft for someone like you.
It's soft, but sitting down and taking account, so taking a record or having a record of what you do. It's again, you can kind of tap that into, I suppose, reflection. What are you grateful for through today? What did I do today that I could do better? That, on that end of things, it doesn't necessarily have to be written down. It's probably better if it is, but you can just do that literally in your head. What did I do this week? What didn't I do? What do I need to do? Anyway, it's Keystone Habit. It's a great book about it called The Power of Habit. And just why did I segue onto that? Because I mentioned exercise. Exercise is also a keystone habit. So when you start to exercise, you start to feel better, sleep better. You start to maybe make better choices for food, alcohol. All these other things tend to to snowball off the back of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Now, what if someone doesn't like exercise? What if they're like, oh, I don't want to do this?
I have a newsflash for you. Most people don't particularly like exercise.
Okay, so that's an interesting point. Because some people think that people that exercise love exercising. And are dying for it.
There is people who love exercise. I like exercise, but I don't like exercise. Like, it's like I never wake up in the morning going, oh, I must really burst out a really hard training session. Like, it just doesn't work like that. But once I get into it, I like it. I like the feeling afterwards, and I enjoy, I enjoy not necessarily always during an exercise, but generally afterwards you feel better for it. You tend to sleep better, you tend to have a better mood. So it's really the results of exercise you like. Does anybody really enjoy doing heavy resistance training, running flat out, totally out of breath? I'm not sure they do, to be quite honest. But they enjoy the results and the overall feeling of feeling healthier than when they don't do it.
And is it better to do it in a group or individually? Like so CrossFit is this thing. And then there's this new thing that I was asked about, High Rocks or something, and it's a lot of mammies are going to it, or it's a very female-based one.
Yeah.
But is it just the same as CrossFit, but it's just called something different? And
it's very similar to CrossFit. High Rocks has got a set protocol so there's 8 kilometers of running, and then there's rowing, skiing, wall balls, burpees,
like every session.
Lunges. Training for the event and competing in the event to be different. It's a bit like a triathlon. If you're going to do a certain distance, bike, run, swim, you mightn't train all elements every day. So people might be training for a High Rocks event, but a High Rocks event is a set routine that takes about roughly 90 minutes, maybe a bit longer, depending on where you're at. And it's a nice challenge for people to do. It's a bit like doing a 5K run or doing a triathlon. It's a nice challenge for people to set themselves.
Okay.
And it's a particular type of challenge, I suppose. It's a bit like comparing it to a triathlon. A triathlon is a set routine, and High Rocks is a set routine. CrossFit, again, as a concept is quite interesting. So again, I suppose CrossFit started out in about, was it 2005? And I suppose they were a little bit ahead of the curve, and they were saying, look, everybody should be exercising. Strength training is really important for your health. CrossFit kind of recognised that the types of strength training we should be doing, gymnastic movements, and gymnastics just means body weight, so like pull-ups, push-ups, squats, lunges, pistols. We've been through all those. Weightlifting, you should be doing some external load resistance, and that prepares you for the reality of real life. Like, you go on your flight to Malaga, you got to pick up your 10-kilo suitcase, put it overhead. So you should be able to lift some resistance in order to be able to do basic
So when
activities.
You say strength training, weight training and resistance training, are they all the same thing?
Same thing, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've strength, resistance, weight training, or cardiovascular. So there's really only two. Yeah,
again, but there's a crossover. There is a resistance element to doing, like if you go out for a run, you're putting 3 times body weight through your joints, through your muscles. So there is a resistance component to it, but we don't classify it as strength training. So again, if you go for a walk, you're loading your bones and your muscles. So improving your bone density by doing that as well. If you're on planet Earth, gravity has an effect on you that we call resistance. And lifting weights and running, they're all creating resistance on the body. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So it's, again, not to get lost in the weeds on it, do some resistance training, i.e. fatigue yourself within short repetitions, and do some sustainable work. So there's going to be an element of cardiovascular exercise to the resistance training, because you're getting your blood pressure up, you're getting your heart rate up, and there's going to be an element of strength training to the cardiovascular exercise. But when we're classifying them, we kind of separate it a little bit just to make it more understandable. So then, getting back to the CrossFit, is it more like a community type of feeling that people have when they go there? I suppose CrossFit's a concept, so it's resistance training, cardiovascular training, gymnastics, and mix it all up so that you're stimulating your body in different ways all the time, as opposed to maybe a set routine like bike, run, swim. You're trying to get a crossover effect from multiple different disciplines, but they do prioritize strength training element as key. They do prioritize some monostructural work, which is running, cycling, swimming, and we do prioritize then mixed modal, which is mixing up a little bit of run with a little bit of weights, because it's a different effect. it's high intensity interval training, basically.
What kind of age profile are the people that?
So we've got members from 16 to 82.
82. That's great, isn't it?
Yeah, and some of those 82-year-olds are amazing. Like they're again with exercise. I think the stats I read on it is that you can kind of reverse your chronological age by 20 to 25 years.
Sure, I'm only 15.
Yeah, you're not even fully developed yet.
You're not even out of the womb.
Who are you bringing to your Debs?
But this is true. Well, I always say it. You know, I'm doing it now so I can tie my own shoelaces when I'm 80 and live an independent life as much as I can.
Yeah.
Because the longer that you can put that off for, the better your health span, lifespan, all of that is.
But again, it's a bit like, and I agree totally with you, and that's how your mind works, right? But the average person, it's a bit like the pension. They're thinking, 80. I mean, I don't care what happens when I'm 80. Like, so again, it's the prevention of disease now, like the mental health benefits, the physical health benefits now, the fact that it'll make your life easier, the fitter you are, generally, you know, the easier your life is from a perspective of your overall health. And then, of course, carrying that into the long run is super important.
Well, otherwise, you see what I see in the pharmacy, and someone has high blood pressure and they're prescribed a tablet for that. And then they're prescribed a tablet to prevent the side effects of the of the blood pressure tablet. Yeah. And then there's another little one added in. And then suddenly someone's on 6 tablets and they have the side effects of that. Yeah. They're fatigued from it, and it's literally, this is what happens. Yeah, it
starts to snowball on it. And that's probably more applicable to most people than, when you're 80 you'll have better health, because it's the here and now. It's like, well, like, and again, you will see people who begin an exercise program and all of a sudden they start peeling back off their meds because their blood. I've seen it. Yeah, and their blood pressure improves, and their energy levels improve, and mental health improves, and they start dialing back off some of the pharmaceuticals.
And that's not to say that someone should be doing that without the consent of their doctor.
No, of course.
But it's literally, I see it. I've seen it happen, and because we're living in a country in the West, and we're privileged enough to do so, where we can live long lives. But the thing about it is that, do we want to live a long life that is, the last 10 years of it are pretty miserable because of disease, or do we want to live those last 10 years as healthily as we can?
Absolutely, yeah.
So, that's why, people say if exercise was a drug, and that you could take, it would just be, you wouldn't need anything else.
No, well, it's just amazing, and you see it all the time with people who, kind of. And again, it's always really heartening to see the beginner start, because they get the most benefit. Like that beginner who comes in and maybe they've enjoyed good health all their life, but they're just particularly sedentary because of lifestyle and all the other reasons, their social circle, whatever, their life circumstance. And then they begin on an exercise program, and the change in them, it's like meteoric. And then like the 80% of the benefits probably come within that first year. Like they get a huge buffer and improvement in their health, start feeling better, they start, their body composition might change, they start feeling stronger, things get easier, they start really enjoying what their body can do, and then that drives them on to move on to the next level and the next level. Whereas if you take an elite athlete, so we all watched the Olympics over the summer, like an elite athlete might work 4 hours a day to maintain where they are and try shave a second off their time or improve their performance just a little bit. And that might be a 4-year journey. But at that level, because they're at the upper threshold of human ability in their given sport, so much effort goes into such little gain, and even just to maintain where they are, it's just phenomenal. But for a beginner who's literally doing very, very little, the improvements they will see in 6 months to a year is mind-blowing. And you see it all the time, that people, when they reach those minimum exercise guidelines, coming from maybe 0, or those recommended exercise guidelines, keep calling them minimums, the change in their life is unbelievable.
It is, and it's almost like you have to see it to believe it. Are you ever too old to start?
No. So we know you can build muscle mass and improve your cardiovascular capacity into your 90s. And they've done studies on this now where people literally begin a bit of resistance training, and cardiovascular and exercise. We stop calling it cardiovascular exercise, but just exercise, and they can start reversing markers of aging, building muscle mass, bone density. I've seen people reverse their osteoporosis through exercise and medication, and lifestyle change and diet. And obviously, it's a lot easier to get healthy and stay healthy than to try reverse. Like when ill health comes knocking on the door, it's very hard. Then you're in the war zone. Then you're trying to dig your way back out of it. So when you have health, try to look after it and try preserve it is the key.
Yeah, it's very true. Sure. What's that saying? When you're coasting along and you've loads of problems, but when you have a health problem, you only have one problem.
Yeah, exactly. Well, what's the saying? Health is the crown on the well person's head that only the sick person can see.
Oh God, I know. Yeah, it's mad, isn't it?
It's like you don't see it till you've lost it.
Yeah.
And then you're trying to get it back. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Can we talk about kids for a minute?
Yes.
Because you did tell me a stat about children.
Yeah. And it's kind of shocked me as well because I didn't realise it's so bad. But this is again published in the National Physical Activity Plan, and it's on the HSE website actually. So 23% of primary school kids meet the minimum or meet the recommended exercise requirements.
Sorry, 12% meet the exercise
23% of primary school kids.
Okay.
And 12% of post-primary kids, we can call them kids, teenagers, meet the physical activity guidelines.
And I'd say there's a split there between girls and boys. I'd say girls are much less than boys.
Probably.
Just because they tend to fall off a cliff when it comes to... It's almost like little girls are grand and they're full of confidence until they start hitting puberty and their bodies change and they become so they just hide away and their physical activity can reduce significantly too. So that is a shocking statistic. Only 12% of them are hitting the goal.
Yeah. And again, we have to think about that then. From a society's perspective, are we happy with that? Is that a statistic we're happy to stand over? Because we can't really blame a primary school kid for reaching 23%. And I'm not trying to blame anybody. I'm not.
You are. You're shit.
No, I'm not.
You are.
And it's not even the parents.
You're blaming the Minister of Education now. We all know that.
No, I think it's more environmental. So again, we bring it back to the kids walking to school, cycling to school, it's probably not necessarily safe depending on where you're living. So that mode of transport is gone. But there is ways we can change that in school. So if we had, let's say for instance, an hour a day of exercise baked into the school curriculum, we already know that's going to improve the retention of anything they're learning in school anyway.
And I absolutely agree with you, okay? And I know we're going to talk about that book, Spark, that you told me to read, which I haven't read yet, but I'm kind of flicking through it. It's very interesting. We say that, and that's great. But then I see the primary school that my lads went to, and they've a little yard the size of a postage stamp. They've one hall. And to even negotiate that amongst 12 classes, because there's 8, about 16 classes to get those hours in. Yeah. And then... Jesus, the first day back at school there, my little fella said to me, it was pissing rain all day and they didn't get out to the yard once. Yeah. That's so bad for our children, boys and girls, because they are designed to be high energy and running around.
And they should be moving around, yeah. And again, so the exercise guideline for kids, they should be doing at least an hour a day of again, it changes at every age level. So I won't go too deep into that, but I'll send you on the link to it. But for primary school kids, they should be doing at least an hour every day of exercise.
So if they're in school and they get their little breaks in the yard or whatever and they're just running around, just say that's half an hour, not even maybe, and they come home and they've homework to do and then it's dark or they, it's hard for them to do that.
It is hard, yeah. But again, a lot of that's environmental. So like you just mentioned, the environment's not set up to facilitate exercise. There's a little small yard and it's raining. I have a friend who's from Denmark, and she's a member in the gym as well, and we was chatting and she was like, I don't understand Irish people, they're complaining about rain all the time. In Denmark we just have coats and boots and everybody just cycles everywhere and gets on with it. It still rains, but some of it's cultural, it's rain, I can't go outside. I mean, you can literally put on a coat and go outside. Okay, kids getting wet in school, so again, there's all these barriers, but the stats don't lie. So we have to look at the barriers and go, right, how do we change that? And again, that's a major task, obviously. I'm not saying I have all the solutions for it, but I certainly don't. I suppose it needs to be brainstormed that, where does this go from here on? If 23% of kids and 12% in secondary school, we know the effect that's going to have on type 2 diabetes, obesity,
mental health,
the lifestyle diseases,
the
mental
children
health,
that they then
all
have.
the other things that are, there's a tsunami coming down the line.
The epigenetics thing as well, where,
of course.
It's self-perpetuating.
Yeah. So as a society, and again, in fairness, this is a great document they've produced of, I suppose, implementing these things into society. I'm very hopeful that things will change. Like in my local community, they've put in a walking track around the GA club. That facilitates parents who are bringing up their kids not to sit in the car, but to get out and go for a walk or a lap. And that's an environmental aspect that facilitates people to exercise. So your kid's school doesn't have a playground. I mean, that should just never happen. I mean, that's a design fault. Or there needs to be community spaces where kids can run around and run around safely and exercise.
I'm hearing all this thing though as well is because we're in the litigious society that we're in as well.
Major problem.
Children are in our school again. They used to whack a hurl or whack a slither back and forth in the morning time before school, and now they're not allowed because I think if some fella got one in the head.
Yeah, and someone sues the school, then there's a ban on running. Okay, so that's a human rights issue in my opinion. You've taken a kid. I mean, if you stop the people in prison exercising, it'd be a human rights issue. But you're stopping children in school from going for a run. There just should be. I mean, that's a societal problem. So, again, do we need to bring in a law that you can't sue a school if a child falls while exercising? The risks of not exercising far outweigh the risk of exercising. And look, again, I suppose that's society's, it's the evolution that we have that litigious society now. But again, we can't just accept that that's okay. We have to kind of dial back. Common sense has to prevail. Kids need to be kids. They need to be allowed to run around, exercising, climbing trees, without the fear of someone getting sued if they fall out of the tree. Again, if children don't learn basic milestones in physical activity by 12, it's very unlikely they're going to pick them up. So basic motor skills like climbing, running, kicking, throwing, all those motor skills need to be developed by about the age of 12. And if not, you've missed the window. Like as a child, it's not like an adult. So a child develops bone density, muscle mass, nervous system, like all these things that are developing in a child as they grow. And if they're missing out on those crucial inputs of physical activity and, climbing, wrestling with their brother or sister on the ground.
We like to call that kicking the shit out of each other in our house.
It's normal development. We need to stop pathologizing that stuff. And again, there's a risk of climbing a tree, but the risk is far better than the alternative.
Oh, the climbing the tree is great though.
Yeah.
It keeps them so occupied.
Yeah.
My fella built a zip line in the trees there on the green recently. But
and I understand it's terrifying for parents. I've often brought my nieces and nephews to the park and they're climbing up something and I'm like, oh my God.
But they're so good at it. They're actually natural at it.
Natural, that's the thing. So it should be something that we encourage in society, and we should have an environment that facilitates that. So in an ideal world, every kid would spend an hour in school doing physical activity, running around, climbing things, exercising. They'd love going to school.
And then they should be coming home and going out as well.
Absolutely,
but I suppose it's, and I get it as well from a parental point of view. When you are out working all day and your kid might be in childcare, and then you come home and then you've got the dinner on, you're trying to get everyone ready for bed. It can just be difficult to squeeze it in. Just like it can be difficult for an adult to squeeze it in.
And everything. And look, I'm not saying I've got the solutions to that. And look,
we're just here complaining, right?
We're kind of brainstorming, and hopefully some of your listeners will be like, 12% of secondary school kids are engaged in exercise.
Yeah,
that's a major problem, and hopefully some solutions come up with. Okay, we need to find a way of integrating that physical activity into the school curriculum. in a way that's because they're not getting it outside of the school curriculum the way maybe they used to for previous generations, because, you know, they're not going home working on the farm for 5 hours.
I was just going to say, they're not running around the farm. That was you, was it?
Well, like, I mean, yeah, I did a good bit of farm work, but like,
were you baling hay there recently?
Hay, no.
What were you doing recently? You were
baling straw.
Baling straw.
I wasn't baling straw. We were harvesting barley and oats and things.
And do you like doing that?
Yeah, it's great. It brings me back down to reality to realise how tough it is, and how I'm lucky to be a physiotherapist and not a farmer.
What made you get into physiotherapy in the first instance?
Interesting story. I originally left school and did a few months in UCD training to be an engineer. Then I left that after 3 months and went to be a trainee actuary. So I went in working in a bank for 4 years, doing actuarial exams, which I wasn't particularly great at, and kind of messing around and, you know, 4 years working in a life insurance company. And then I went back to college to do physiotherapy. So I was always, I suppose, intrigued and interested and fascinated by the human body, its workings.
But how'd you go from engineering, actuarial work
to physio?
They're very different parts. Well, I suppose engineering you're interested in how things work.
They're all analytical. Three analytical professions. You're kind of looking at, and look, I could be happy doing any of the three of them. I'm just interested in, I suppose I'm an inquisitive mind. I'm interested in you know, still interested in finance, still interested in engineering, still interested in architecture, and still interested in, you know, human performance and physical activity.
Okay.
So I just like a lot of things. My mind's running on, I don't know, is it ADHD or is it just inquisitive mind? I'm not sure. But
it's good to be interested in lots of different things.
I think so, yeah. Yeah, it's important, yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about that book, Spark? Because that brings us back to the children, and I think that's important.
So again, the book, it's about 10 years since I read it, but so basically the long story short was it speaks about how exercise affects the brain. So when we exercise, we, as I mentioned before, our muscles tend to release chemicals into the bloodstream. And one of those chemicals is BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which helps repair your brain and neural connections. And it also when we exercise, we tend to get more, we tend to, I suppose, get a better concentration immediately after exercise. So there was a school in America, can't remember where, they had one of the worst performing statistically students on, I don't know, whatever metric they measure in the US. So this guy was reading up about exercise and decided he was going to implement an exercise program in the school. So they started off with, was it a run every morning or some exercise routine every morning in the school? And they kind of got into this, and he got heart rate monitors and started looking at everybody's. Again, there's a few things that stand out to me from the book, and it's a while ago since I read it, but the two pieces that I thought were really interesting were he put on heart rate monitors on all the kids and sent them off for a mile run. And he said the first guy back did it in whatever time, let's call it 6 minutes for the mile, and the last girl in did it in 12 minutes. And his instinct was to go, come on, you can push a bit harder than that, you know? And then he downloaded all the software and all the data, and he sat there and he was ashamed of himself. Her heart rate was up to 190. She was trying the hardest of everybody out there and pushing as hard as she physically could. And the guy who won it was only coasting because his ability, his natural ability, gave him an advantage over her. And this is what happens all the time in sport.
Jeez, I feel a bit goosebumpy.
Yeah, we feel a bit. We tend to look at the genetic outliers, and these are the guys that people look at and go, right, the Olympian, and I want to be like that, and we judge ourselves off these outliers. But the reality is, he sat there and went, well, look, we should be rewarding the effort put in as much as the result. And so he went back in and said, look, I made a mistake, and the gold medal actually goes to this lady. She got her heart rate up to the last. She pushed as hard as she could. Her time is one metric of outcome, but her effort and her heart rate judges that is the other metric of output. So the culture began in the school where they all turned up and did their best on the exercise routine every morning. And then they went in and the culture within the school started to change. kids were much more focused because they're burning off that energy. They're getting blood flow to the brain. They're getting release of chemicals into the system, which helps them to focus a bit better. And they turned around and they got, after a year of implementing this program in the school, they'd one of the best results across the state, having come from being one of the worst. And that's what he writes the book about. Basically, look, the power of exercise on your brain. And, you know, one of those chemicals is BDNF. There's multiple other chemicals. He did the kind of trial on it of implementing this in a school, changes the performance of the kids, changes the culture, and we should be trying to roll it out. And again, I thought it was a powerful story. Again, it's 10 years since I read the book, but there are the two things I kind of remember from it.
We're going to put the names of everything that Albert has mentioned into the show notes as well.
It's a powerful story, yeah.
I do get emotional sometimes when I'm doing these podcasts, but I felt really emotional there. I can just imagine that girl and she's running.
Yeah. And you mentioned then how people drop out of sport.
Yes.
And this is one of the reasons that sport... So again, physical activity and sport aren't the same thing. So sport is competitive and genetics play a massive role in that. Like, you know, like if both parents were athletes, there's a good chance you've got athletic genes and, you know, the deck is stacked in your favour. But when we're talking about exercise, we're talking about, you know, this wonder drug that everybody should be taking. And the people who need to take it the most are probably the people who get turned off the most by engaging in sport. So sport, when it becomes competitive too early, I don't think is very healthy. So soccer clubs now, I had this chat with my brother at the weekend that, you know, they're starting to bring in competitive soccer for under 11s. And I don't know, I think you need to wait till they get to secondary school before it starts becoming competitive. Now, I know there's the other side that, you know, kids know and want to compete anyway. But there has to be a balance there that every kid gets a chance. You know, they haven't fully developed. So you can cut off someone's progression too early. Like there's late developers and fast developers. And if people get turned off sport and turned off exercise too early. So there's a happy medium to it. And we need to kind of be cognizant of the fact that we should try to make exercise and sport inclusive for as long as we can before it becomes competitive.
So instead of having leagues all the time, that we just, you know, the kids can get together and kick a ball around, as opposed to it being this strategy of winning matches.
Yeah, exactly. Because again, look, there's always going to be a case if you're in a club you want to win, and I get all that. And if there's no winning, then some kids won't be interested. It's like, well, what's the point? It's just, you know. So there's a balance to all that. But I think we need to set up safeguards that we try and include everybody in sport, or find a sport that works for them, or not even a sport, but just to get them engaged in exercise for as long as we can. Because
some kids don't like the team sport. Some kids won't like soccer.
Absolutely.
But I know parents that have tried kids in absolutely everything, and the kids have hated it, and then they found gymnastics or dancing or something that they just like to do.
Yeah, it's good. Again, it doesn't have to be a team sport, because team sports, by their very nature, you got to make the team, so you got to make the cut. But
you got to get on with people.
Yeah, but let's say it's athletics. You don't need to make the cut. You can finish last. As long as you enjoy it.
Same with yoga, guys. That's why I do it.
Yoga's brilliant.
You don't need to talk to anyone.
So again, it's I suppose it's looking at all these elements and trying to look. It is obviously very hard, and physical activity and sport aren't necessarily the same thing, you know. So like you can go out for a walk in the woods and get your physical activity in, where sport by its nature is competitive. So participation is important.
100%. But isn't the human body just miraculous? Like, I remember when I was in that room that you have off the gym that you have, and you have this picture of the human body, and you have all the muscles and all the bones and how they're all connected and stuff. And I was looking at it going, and I said it to you, I was like,
it's amazing.
But doesn't it make you think there has to be something out there that created that?
Yeah, like I think
just how they all work together, and how if one thing goes wrong, like for instance, if you become insulin resistant, how this cascade of events happen. Is it, you know?
And we definitely don't know it all. Like we're still learning so much about the human body. Like it's almost like we're heading for Everest in our understanding, and you get to base camp, you think that's Everest, and then you get to base camp and realise we haven't even started climbing. Like it's our understanding of the human body and its capacity is changing all the time. I mean, the microbiome in the gut is probably only something that we're really tuning into in the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm. And there's going to be so much more.
Yeah, so much more. And I think we have a very limited understanding of everything. And I think if we approach it from that point of view, then we're probably halfway, or maybe we're on the first stepping stone to understand, and we know very little about almost everything.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
What advice did you give young people today, Albert?
What advice would I give young people today? Well, I suppose after my big rant here, I suppose
you never shut up,
engage in some physical activity for a start. But I suppose, look, I think try to be yourself. That's probably the most important message I'd have, that, you know, be yourself. Everybody else is already taken, as they say. Like, the world needs you to be your own, I suppose, unique individual, and bring your own unique insights and passions into the world. And it doesn't need you to chase someone else's dream. It needs you to chase your own dream. And by doing that, I think you're going to move humanity forward, but not necessarily on a global stage. It might just be within your own family, within your own community. And I think that's as important as doing it on a global stage.
Absolutely. Yeah, sure. What do they say? If you can just change a little bit of the environment.
Yeah, exactly. Just around it. That's probably the most important piece, yeah.
And what is the meaning of life?
The meaning of life, I suppose, it'd be even absurd for me to attempt to answer that, but I'm not sure life needs us to give it a meaning. I think we are here experiencing life, and life exists with or without us. We're here to experience it and appreciate it. And, you know, I think we know very little about the meaning of life. I couldn't possibly come to an answer that would be of any great meaning. But I think if you can sit back and enjoy it, it's a great show.
It absolutely is. Where can people find you?
God, I'm not very active online. Try to stay off that. I suppose I have a gym in Blackrock. It's CrossFit 536, and I have a physiotherapy clinic, physiokinetics.ie. So probably that's the best way to contact me.
Okay. Thank you very much, Albert. It's been a pleasure.
You're very welcome.